All right, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our third session of the Social Academy for Interns, the portion known as Unfiltered Straight Talk on Social Security. My name is Kathryn, and I am a NASI intern placed at the National PACE Association. PACE is an acronym for the Program of All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. And I am here to briefly introduce to you our panel of distinguished members, starting with Ms. Kathryn Edwards. She is a research assistant with the Economic Policy Institute. We are particularly honored with Ms. Edwards' presence today, since this is her last week with EPI before going off to pursue her doctorate in economics. So congratulations on an exciting beginning. And in addition to that, I just found out that she has authored a book that will be released by EPI next Wednesday called A Young Person's Guide to Social Security. So please be on the lookout for that next week.
You can hear the event in the context of
We also have with us today Mr. Marc Goldwein, the Policy Director with the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Marc also holds the distinction of being the youngest member of the National Academy of Social Insurance. That's still true, right? Hopefully. Okay. And he was also a former NASI intern. So if you'd like to learn more about them, their full bios can be found in your conference folders. And following the presentations, we'll have plenty of time for you to ask questions to the panel. And with that, I quickly turn the podium over to Ms. Edwards.
All right, hello. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, we're good? Okay. So if it ain't broke, don't break it. I'm going to give you my take on Social Security and its outlook going forward. It'll probably be a lot of the things that you've already heard today, but hopefully I will package it in a way that is interesting, hopefully. So let's get right to it. Where is Social Security going in the next 75 years? This figure shows Social Security spending as a percentage of GDP from 2009 to 2085. The darker shaded area to the left is what the trust fund will cover. And the area to the right is where we start to get into long-term shortfalls. And that year is 2037. So between 1984 and 2009, Social Security spending averaged around 4.5% of GDP. Right now, it's around 4.8%. It's going to go up to 6% by 2029, and then it'll level out at a little under 6%. So that's what we're playing with. That is the essentially the obstacle we need to tackle. So what are some things that I want you guys to notice? First, this is a level shift. Okay, I mean, you can see that this cost curve, it's what we technical people call flat, right? It doesn't go up forever into the future. It levels out. So we're talking about a 1.5% increase in GDP. That is a one-time increase. All right, it's not forever growing over time. It stays level as a percentage of our economy. So how big is 1.5% of GDP? I tend to think it's not that big, but only because we frequently increase spending by 1.5% of GDP. In fact, we did it for the Department of Defense between 2001 and 2009. So, but why do we have this shortfall? Why is spending going to stay above revenue? Well, you can look at it in a lot of ways, but the way that I want you guys to look at it is on things we saw coming and things we didn't see coming. So what did we know was going to happen for Social Security going out 75 years? We knew that the population was going to age, and we knew that we would have an increase in life expectancy. This shows the projected and actual fertility rates from the 1983 Trustees Report and the 2010 Trustees Report. Okay, so they have to report out 75 years. That is the longest projection that is made in any country about their pension program, by the way. So the black line is what actually happened, right? In 1983, we've just come off the baby boom. This is the number of children that each woman of childbearing age is expected to have. So we come off the boom and the black line ends. And in 83, we have two lines. We have the gray line and the dots. That's what actually happened. And then the black line is the 1983 projection. If it gets hard to see, that's because in the long run, they're the same. We have not changed how our fertility rate projections since 1983 in the long run. We think it's going to be 2. And that's where it will balance out for the future. And this is what we saw happening over 20 years ago. If you're skeptical about this, it actually is pretty obvious from the name baby boom, right? Because it's not called baby plateau It's baby boom. So we knew we had a period of high birth rates that was going to be followed by a flattening out period. So what else did we see coming? Life expectancy. So life expectancy you can look at in 2 time periods. You either look at birth or at 65, but since we're paying out benefits to retirees, we tend to look at 65 because that's what matters for Social Security. So this is male and female life expectancy. Interesting things to note, this is a 145-year time period that we're looking at, and we're looking at an increase in life expectancy at 65 of about 10 years. I didn't put the projections up there because I am fanatical about graph aesthetics, and it looked terrible. But the female, we over-projected females by about 1.5 years, and we under-projected males by about 1.5 years. So it levels out. But again, this is something that we knew was going to happen. And for the record, we're really glad this happened. We get lost in the budget debate and the bottom line, and we think, people are living longer. That means we have to pay out more on Social Security. That was actually the whole point, that people get to live longer with Social Security, because your retirement plan before Social Security was actually death. You kind of died. If you look at retirement rates before Social Security, you didn't really have a retirement. That was like, Teresa Ghilarducci says it's like living in a castle. It was just not something that most people got to do. Retirement was a true victory of the 20th century, that we actually get to retire. So the idea that we're living longer in retirement is kind of the whole point. We're really glad this happened, and we knew it was going to happen, and we want it to keep on happening. This is not a problem. This is a brilliant fact about the way that our population and our economy is structured. So what did we not see coming? What were we not counting on for Social Security? That would be inequality. So I'm going to explain this in 2 ways. First, using income growth, and the second, using wage percentiles. So inequality. This is real annual family income growth by quintile. So by quintile means if you line up every family in the country from richest to poorest, you're going to divide them up into 5 groups of equal number. Okay? And so this is what's happening to the annual percentage growth for these 5 groups' income. The blue period, right, is the 3 decades following World War II. This picket fence, as we call it, of income growth is exactly what we want to have happen. This doesn't mean that poor people and rich people are making the same amount of money, right? It just means that their income is growing at the same rate. So we're all moving forward. And you can see it was across the board, benefit cuts, and actually the bottom grew the fastest. The red period this is what inequality looks like if you wanted to graph it. All right, the poorer you are, your income falls, and the richer you are, the faster your income grows. For 30 years, this is what we've been dealing with. Another way to look at it is in terms of wages. This is wage percentiles. So for quintiles, we're looking at groups of equal number. For percentiles, we're looking at the bookends, right? We're not looking at a group of 50, a group of the population. We're looking at like one marker. Right? So the 50th percentile is the median, right? Half people make below that, half the people make above that. For 95, 90, and 80, you're doing pretty well since 1973. But if you're in the bottom half, you didn't actually start to see wage increases until we reached near full employment at the end of the 1990s business cycle, and it's pretty much stagnated once it received that increase. So how does this affect Social Security, the fact that the bottom half of wage earners are, in a sense, floundering? Well, we've already talked about this. It's the tax cap, right? Social Security tax cap was $106,800 in 2010. In 1983, it covered 90% of earnings due to the lack of wage growth for the bottom 94% of earners. It is now at 83.6%, and that number is actually falling. Our tax base for Social Security is eroding. This is an estimated half of the shortfall. So when I look at reforming Social Security and what we need to do going forward, I see that we absolutely saw that costs were going to increase. We knew what was going to happen with the population. We did not know what was going to happen with the economy and what was going to happen in wages. So in my mind, that says, let's increase revenue and not cut costs. And I know that Table 13 didn't get to present, but Table 13, we did not cut benefits. So way to go, Table 13. We didn't get there. I'm not going to say I had any influence on that. All right, so we just went over a lot of ways to reform Social Security, so I'm not going to talk about that because I want to talk about cutting costs. I cannot be more clear about this. The only way to cut costs when it comes to Social Security is by cutting benefits. Social Security spends 1% of its outlays on administrative costs, less than 1%. So that means if you want to control Social Security's costs, you have to cut benefits. That's fine if you want to do that, but that will probably have consequences, and that's what I want to talk about today. What happens when you cut benefits? Social Security is the most effective anti-poverty program in the United States. The most effective, unequivocally. Nothing comes close. This is the elderly poverty rate in Social Security expenditures as a percentage of GDP. As we increase Social Security spending in our economy, the elderly poverty rate falls. It used to be over a third. It is now under 9. Do you guys see, do you see the 2009 recession right at the end and what happened to elderly poverty? Yeah, it went down. The worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, and elderly poverty decreased. It was the only group that saw a decrease over the past 2 years. That's how effective Social Security is at keeping people out of poverty. But to be fair, you could really hate old people. You could not care about what happens to their poverty, right? It could just not matter to you, which is fine. But when I say that Social Security is the most effective anti-poverty program in the United States, I am not talking about seniors. It kept 20.5 million people out of poverty in 2009. 14 million of those were seniors, which is obviously a huge win, but that means that 6.5 million weren't. That means that 6.5 million people kept out of poverty every year by Social Security are not over the age of 65. They're working age people and their children. The next largest program, just to put that in context, is the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is at 4.2. After that, it's food stamps, which is at 3.6. I'm not going to say welfare because any program named welfare that keeps so few people actually out of poverty is really not worth mentioning on a slide about poverty, but this is what is at stake. Now, to be fair, I'm really overly dramatic, and I love Social Security. I think it's just such a great program, and it does so much for our economy. So I could be overstating it. You know, it's not like we cut benefits by $1 and like 20.5 million people become poor the next day, as much as I would like to sell it as much. So this is Social Security as a percentage of income for elderly households. So once again, we're looking at quintiles. We're looking at 5 groups of equal number. The black is Social Security. I don't know where that 0% came from. The black is Social Security. The gray is non-Social Security. Okay? This is Social Security as a percentage of income for the elderly population. So when I say that people are living on Social Security, you can see for the bottom 40, it's over 80% of their income. That's not as interesting because it's not really a shock that poor people rely on Social Security. I want you to look at the middle 2 quintiles. All right, this is how we would define the middle class in America. All right, this is where we all think we are and where we all think we'll end up. Social Security is 64% of someone's income if they're in the middle quintile, and it's 44% for the next quintile above that. Something to note, this highest fifth, like 40% of that is earnings because they're still working, right? So they're not necessarily out of the labor force yet. And this is not a lot of money. This was the average retirement benefit in 2009. All right, so that means that if you go back, that means that someone at the middle fifth is making, if you do the math, they're making, all right, less than like $26,000 a year for the, well, that's like not the most proper math. The income cutoff for the top fifth is actually around 50,000. So we're not talking about a lot of money, but we are talking about 53 million Americans who rely on Social Security benefits. So if you want to cut benefits, you just have to know what's at risk for us and for the economy. Just to close it out, when I think of Social Security, I think of a program that provides benefits to 53 million Americans. I think of the most solvent and the most efficient part of our federal government, and that is Social Security. When I see a program like that, I'm just thinking, don't cut it, man. If we actually do something well, like, let's make this work as opposed to make it smaller. But I think Mark will sing a slightly different tune. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Kathryn, very much. And I'm ashamed to admit that I thought this presentation was tomorrow. So if I look a little scruffy, that's because I just ran here 10 minutes ago. I agree with Kathryn that Social Security is not broken, but it is going broke. I think you all heard from Steve Goss earlier today. We have an actuarial imbalance in Social Security. Already the program is in cash deficits. That means that it's spending more than it's bringing in revenue. And over time, it's going to draw more and more from its trust fund until eventually it runs out. In 2036, if we do nothing, that means a 23% benefit cut for everyone. Poor, rich, current seniors, new retirees, people that are disabled, children, dependents. That's a 23% cut that's scheduled in the current law if we do nothing. But in addition to Social Security problem, we actually have a federal debt problem. And there's a lot of discussion, does Social Security add to the deficit, does it not? And we can have that talk. But when you look at the most acceptable economic measure of debt, that is debt held by the public, we're in an unsustainable path. Typically, we have debt equal to about 40% of the economy. Right now, it's 65. By the end of the decade, it's heading to 90 or higher. That's the level that many economists have warned has substantial effects on economic growth if we don't first hit a fiscal crisis because the markets lose confidence in us. So why do we have this deficit? Well, I wouldn't love to sit here, but you would expect me to sit here and say, well, it's because of Social Security. It's not. Social Security is not the biggest driver. The biggest driver is the growth of Medicare and Medicaid and the structural imbalance between how much we spend and our revenue. But Social Security plays a part if you look at that red line. Social Security will grow by about another percentage point of GDP. It already has grown by almost a percentage point. So if you look at Social Security's growth, it's a contributor. Healthcare is the bigger contributor, Medicare and Medicaid. But then you've asked the question, well, why are these programs growing? Really, there's two reasons. One is healthcare costs continue to grow faster than the economy. And if this was a healthcare forum, I think we should have a really long discussion about how we can better control healthcare costs. I think the Affordable Care Act takes some important first steps, but doesn't get us anywhere close to being there. But we also have an aging problem. And if you look at this graph, through 2050, population aging is still responsible for about half the growth of entitlement costs. Even looking out to 2085, it's still responsible for 45% of the growth of entitlement costs. And aging has consequences besides that. Population aging means slower economic growth. There's fewer workers. That means there's a smaller labor force. And there's fewer investors because more people are pulling out of their savings investment instead of putting into it. So that slows economic growth. Population aging, in particular, increasing life expectancy, leads to greater risk of poverty in old age. Because as people live longer, Social Security or not, they're more likely to outlive their savings due to having more years that they need to spend those savings. And then there's the fiscal insolvency. We already discussed how it's causing entitlement spending to balloon. It's also causing revenue to depress because there's less workers paying taxes relative to the population. More people are retired. And so we need to address aging, and we need to address Social Security's shortfall, both. When I look at Social Security reform, I kind of have three basic principles. The first is we need to make this program sustainably solvent. That means it has about this actuarial imbalance, which I know you all have heard about. That's over 2% of payroll. But eventually that imbalance is going to go to 4%. And if we don't put it on a steady path, then we're really just kicking the can down the future and causing there to be continuous long deficits that we're going to have to address at a later date. That's what happened in 1983. We thought we'd fixed it for the 75-year period, but we didn't have the lines converging, the revenue and the spending lines converging at the end. And so we never actually addressed the structural imbalance. Secondly, Social Security reform has to protect those who rely on it most. Kathryn pointed out how great of an anti-poverty program Social Security is. That's true. Another great benefit of Social Security is all the benefits grow with wages. So over time, just left on the natural, it will do more and more to protect poverty until we get that 23% benefit cut that's scheduled into law. But we need to continue to protect those by focusing any benefit changes and cuts more toward the top, and by finding ways to actually strengthen benefits at the bottom. For example, minimum benefits, other changes to the formula, things like that. Third, Social Security reform needs to be politically palatable. We can sit here all day and talk about what the ideal reform is that each of us would like, but if it can't pass Congress, then it can't pass Congress. And the most popular plan in Congress now is the Do Nothing plan. And I'll say it again, that's a 23% cut in all benefits for everyone in 2036. And finally, we need to do something to start to mitigate the effect of population aging. We're not going to reverse it. We're not going to go have another baby boom and then several after that. But we can bend the aging curve. People talk all the time about how we can bend the healthcare cost curve, how we can slow healthcare cost growth. And we can, and we should try. But we can also bend the aging curve. You might ask, how do you do that? Well, aging is really, when we say aging, what we're really talking about is something called a dependency ratio. That's the ratio of the number of workers to the number of retirees. To address this, we could change the demographics. We could have more babies, bring in more immigrants, or death panels. The other thing we could do, I mean, those are all kind of silly, and within the context of Social Security reform or any reasonable government policy may not make very much sense. Secondly, we can make retirees less dependent. I mean, we can get retirees to save more so they have more money on their own and they're less dependent on the workers. We can also make workers wealthier. If workers are wealthier, they have more money to give to retirees, and that kind of offsets the effects of aging. And finally, you know what? This is in the PowerPoint version. That line gradually goes down with an animation, but it doesn't here. But we can change the equation. Is the point I'm trying to get to here? We can make it so more retirees are workers, and in doing that, we can actually change the dependency ratio and mitigate the effect of aging. In slightly more scientific terms, what we're talking about is increasing mortality, increasing fertility, increasing immigration, increasing savings, encouraging longer working lives, and improving economic growth. The first three are probably non-starters, but we can get people to save more and we can get people to work longer. And in doing so, that by itself would have an added bonus of improving economic growth. We absolutely can do this. It's true that there are some people that can't work past age 62 that have hardships. But if you look at this graph, this shows when people used to retire on average compared to when they retire now. Every year, life expectancy has gone up, and the average age of retirement has gone down. Moreover, there's not many people that are talking about raising the retirement age next year. A lot of these changes are talking about doing it gradually. And if we do that, we can give people time to prepare, time to understand that their benefits are going to be a little lower and the retirement age is going to be a little longer. For full disclosure, I was the associate director of the Bowles-Simpson Fiscal Commission. And we had a Social Security plan, which isn't my first choice of a plan, but it meets all my criteria, and I think it's a pretty good plan. First of all, to address that aging issue, we raised the retirement ages to index it to the growth of life expectancy. That is, Saturday Night Live made fun of us actually after a report came out. They said the Fiscal Commission came out with their report today that raised the retirement age to age 69 by 2075. So next time you see a baby crying, it's because they're going to have to work for 2 more years. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. People in 2075 working 2 more years. Secondly, NASI's done a lot of good work on this, but it's a little complicated. But we switched the measure of inflation we use for cost of living adjustments to something that we believe, and I believe is a more accurate measure of inflation, and that saves some money. We also made progressive benefit changes, which affected mainly people at the top, but kind of did go down the income ladder to affect people at the 50th percentile. I agree with Kathryn, we need to deal with inequality, and I agree that the wealthy need to be paying more, not only through lower benefits, but also through their payroll tax contribution. So we increased the taxable maximum to cover 90% of earnings, which, as you see, covers about 35% of the shortfall in 22 in the last year. And we covered state and local workers. We also enhanced benefits for some people. We saw that there is a problem with the old, so we created a flat dollar benefit enhancement for anyone who's been eligible for 20 years. So that's a long-term disabled and old. And we created a minimum benefit that started at about 130% of the poverty line and grew with wages. So over time, we'd protect more and more people so they could never fall into poverty. This is the result of our plan. As you see, revenues go up, spending goes down, and eventually the lines equalize and the program is solvent. That's the test that you need to meet for any Social Security plan. I mean, you can move the lines differently, but they need to match at the end. If I had my own ways, there's some things I would change. First of all, we have a huge retirement security problem that goes far beyond Social Security, and I think we should strongly consider either requiring or through very strong automation, getting everybody to have retirement accounts. Having retirement accounts not only gives people more money to save for themselves in their retirement, but it also increases the amount of investment in the economy. Secondly, I actually think we raised the retirement age a little on the slow side. I think we could have raised it a little faster and used that money to enhance benefits further for people at the bottom and in the middle. And finally, I don't think this can be, Social Security can do all the heavy lifting for dealing with the population aging issue. We need to improve retirement signals everywhere. That's in our 401ks, in our pension rules, in Medicare, in federal retirement. If we do that, and if we can actually get people to work longer, and we can actually protect the most vulnerable, I think we hold out a lot of promise to having a balanced plan that brings this program under control, starts to move our budget in the right direction, and lets Social Security keep its promise. Thank you.
If you have questions for either Kathryn or Marc, now is your chance. Please, as before, get the attention of one of our people with the wireless microphones, and be sure to state your name, your organization, and keep your questions as brief as possible so we can get as many people in. Thanks.
This question for Marc. You mentioned, and I'm Peter. I'm with the Social Security Advisory Board. You talked about the actuarial imbalance of taxable payroll of 2.22%, and then you mentioned the 4% payroll structural gap. Can you explain that?
Sure. So there's actually a few things going on at once. But when the actuaries calculate the structural imbalance, first they start by looking at how much money is in the trust fund, and then they kind of, through something called present value calculation, they look at how much you'd have to raise taxes immediately to, when combined with the trust fund, make it so you still have a trust fund at the end of the period. So if we raise taxes immediately by 2.22%, the combination of that money, its interest, and the trust fund and its interest would be enough so we would go bankrupt in year 76. The 4% represents the fact that over time, actually, right now we actually have relatively small deficits, but over time, the gap between the cost of Social Security and the revenue is going to grow to above 4% of payroll.
Okay, next question.
Andrew with the Senate Budget Committee. I had a question for Kathryn. What happens to poverty rates given that if we don't, in the hypothetical, that we don't fix anything in 2036? So what happens then when we cut benefits to three quarters?
Yeah, that's a good question. It really does get to a matter of hypotheticals. What the poverty rate will be at that point. For elderly, I think you'd have to run some pretty intense statistical analysis to come up with a good answer, which I haven't done, and I don't know anyone who's done that, but I can check. Maybe CVO's done that.
My memory, and I could be, but from a run from Social Security Administration, is poverty rates for beneficiaries compared to what's scheduled in that year about triple. But poverty rates are scheduled to not be. That's a little bit of overstatement because poverty rates are actually, as scheduled, expected to decline pretty precipitously. So they'd be higher than today, tripled to what projected, but not triple of today.
Okay. Person in the yellow sweater.
As far as fewer investors, you mentioned that automating an investment plan for people to invest in their retirement. But does the fewer investors have anything to do with the decline in employer-based pension plans, or how would you see remedying that besides making something automatic?
For the most part, most of the money that's been lost from the decline in employer-provided pensions has been made up for with 401ks and other vehicles. The problem with those is they're much more focused on the wealthy than employer-provided pensions are, and they're less stable. On the other hand, I don't think employer-provided pensions are really coming back, but we can take the parts of them that are good, things like annuitization and really broad-based automatic availability, and apply those to retirement plans that are defined contribution.
Okay, next question over here.
Hey, I'm Amanda Volbert from NASI, and I just had a question for Marc. Both you in an early slide and also President Obama mentioned that Social Security is not a main driver behind today's deficit. However, Representative Becerra and others have said that it hasn't contributed at all. Can you explain the discrepancy there?
Well, there's two things going on. There's a difference between what's deficit and debt, and there's a difference between which measure you look at, whether you look at the on budget and the debt by the public, or the gross budget and the unified debt. And that all sounded really confusing. But the basic answer is this. Social Security has its own trust fund, and so as long as it's drawing from that trust fund, it's not adding to what's called the gross debt. It is contributing. It does have its own deficit, but it pulls its own deficit out of its trust fund. The problem is, economically speaking, gross debt isn't really that important. What matters is how much is the U.S. government as a whole, including its regular government, including Social Security borrowing. And on that basis, in the past, Social Security was running surpluses, and so actually holding that number down. Now Social Security is running deficits, and so it actually is now increasing debt held by the public, and will do so more over the future.
Okay, next question.
Mark, you had in your presentation the raising the age limit, and you had the chart about, when Social Security was first enacted, people were, retiring at like age 72. What would you say for people that spend their entire lives working in like hard manual labor jobs? How could raising the retirement age affect them? Do you think that they would be able to work that long?
There's a famous FDR quote that says we're never going to be able to protect 100% of people from 100% of risk 100% of the time. There's always going to be people just left behind, just as right now, people who are 61 who are in hard labor jobs don't have access to Social Security. So if you kind of follow that logic that we can't touch the age, there's nothing magic about 62 or 65. The fact is there's a lot less people working in hard labor today than there was in the 30s, the 60s, or the 80s when people used to retire later. That doesn't mean that everyone can work longer. And the Fiscal Commission actually created a hardship exemption to try to help those people. And I think there's other things we can do as well. But I don't think it would be sensible to try to protect 10 to 20% of people at the cost of 100% of the people. I think we can be more targeted.
Okay, well, I'm actually going to disagree with that because I think this is supposed to be a debate. So I've been waiting to disagree for a while. So the thing about life expectancy is it doesn't have an equal distribution, right? If you look, Social Security, some policy analysts from the Social Security Administration did a study a few years ago looking at who gained from life expectancy. All right, and the top half of the earnings distribution gained much more than the bottom half. All right, so I have the number in front of me just so it doesn't sound like I don't know. Okay, so between 1972 and 2001, the top half of the earnings distribution, their retirement age went up by their life expectancy went up by 6.5 years, and for the bottom half, it went up by 1.9 years. Right, so it's a factor of 3 that the people who are living longer are also the people who are making more money. Right, they're also the people who are more likely to have pension and retirement benefits through their job. They're also the people more likely to have health benefits through their job and have non-Social Security assistance when it comes to their retirement income. So there is a distributional effect to raising the retirement age because essentially the people who I think I saw in Paul Krugman's blog, it's like a CEO lives longer, so the janitor that cleans his office has to work longer. But it seems kind of black and white, but that's kind of how you should think of it, right? People who are at the bottom have to work longer because people at the top are living longer. And it's not necessarily that black and white, but that's a good way to illustrate it. Also, working longer is not the right term. Longer is not the right adjective, it's farther. All right, so I'm the perfect example of this. After I graduated high school, I went to college, and I graduated college at 21. And at 22, obviously, rather than enter the workforce, I traveled for a year. So I did not become employed full-time, full year until I was 23, and I put in all of a little under 3 years of work, and now I'm going to go get a PhD for 5 years. And then I will come back at the prime age of 31, ready to work for real this time. Right? Now, that's different from someone who did not go to college and did not get a PhD. Right? He probably started his job first year, full-time, full-year job at 18. So am I really working longer? Because I got more education. So I'm not really working longer. I'm working farther because I started later. Right? That's different from someone who started, say, waiting tables when they were 17. So longer and farther are an important distinction when we talk about the retirement age.
Okay, next question. Oh, no. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, Mark, I've got a question for you. My name's Garrett. I'm working with Congressman Ron Kind. And you talked about having people who are the highest wage earners contribute more to Social Security. And one of your suggestions you said was to gradually restore the cap to 90% of your earnings, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, one of the Commission's recommendations was to raise the cap to 100%.
Yeah, and so we had talked about that in our interactive exercise a decent amount. But one of the things that we brought up that I'm not quite sure if this is true was that means that the only people that would be significantly affected by that would be people that make between $106,000 and $180,000, but doesn't actually get to the top wage earners. Is that true? And if that is true, is that really the portion of the population that we are looking to get more involved, or are we looking for that upper echelon?
Well, it affects everybody that makes above 106 because if you make $1 million, you're still paying that extra money on between 106 and 180. So it affects everybody. But you're right. If you did a distributional analysis that started at 106 and ended at infinity, it would be regressive along those lines. My general view is we have a tremendous fiscal shortfall outside of Social Security, mainly caused by healthcare and also caused by the fact that we can and should keep kind of making investments and spending money on the poor and doing all the things the government should actually be doing. And we're going to have to raise the crap out of taxes on the rich just to finance those things. And so that's why I get a little nervous about eliminating the cap entirely, because I don't think you necessarily have a 12% increase and then if we let upper income taxes expire, there's another 3%, and then go back to them and ask for another 10%. I think that it starts to create economic problems, but it also starts to create political problems, and I'd rather use that money to pay for health care and other things.
Well, I'll say two things to that. One, they just got a really big tax cut, so they are doing okay. And two, I know it seems like if you look at 106 to 108,000, you're really kind of you're not going at wealthy people, but it's still the top 6% of earners, right? This isn't the middle class. I mean, the average, the median household income in America. Any guesses? Median household income. So if you took every household in America, lined them up for richest to poorest, and grabbed the house in the middle, how much money are they making? Yeah, around 50, right? So to say that a wage earner at 180,000, I mean, they are at the very top of the wage distribution. Now, they might not be at the top 1, but they're still in the top 6. It's still not a tax increase on the bottom 94% of us that are making under, $106,800. So I mean, that's something to keep in mind, because it doesn't really feel like a tax on rich people, right? If you just say it's $150,000, but it is a tax on rich wage earners.
Also, remember, sometimes we conflate individual income and family income. So if two people are making 106, that's 212.
Question over the far table.
Hello. So you stated a few times, Mark, that by raising the age faster, it could help the lower and middle earners. But given that lower and middle earners are usually the ones in the hardest work and at the lowest wages, I don't see how that is possible. So I'm wondering if you could provide more details.
Sure. No, what I was saying is, if I was given the Fiscal Commission's plan as a starting point and I could modify it, I would have raised the retirement age faster than they did and used the extra savings to throw it back in enhancing benefits for those groups. So I wasn't saying that raising the age in itself would help them. I was saying the extra savings I would use to help them. That said, if you just look at a distributional analysis of raising the normal retirement age, it is a little bit progressive, because this is a benefit reduction. It is a benefit reduction. We should admit that. This is a benefit reduction that doesn't affect the disabled population at all. And the disabled population is more skewed toward lower income than the retired population. So just raising the normal retirement age is a little bit progressive.
Wait,
but,
really?
Yep.
It's really progressive to make people work longer, even though that rich people live longer than poor people? That is not, okay, I'm sorry, I actually didn't know this. There are studies that say it's more progressive to raise the retirement age?
Because of the disability thing, yeah. I'll show you one.
Wait, but disability beneficiaries aren't dependent on the retirement age. Disability beneficiaries are dependent on disability.
Exactly. So if you look at the entire Social Security system,
okay, that's like apples and oranges, right?
No, it's not. It's part of the same Social Security system.
But I'm going to judge a benefit cut for 2/3 of beneficiaries by what happens to the entire group of beneficiaries, 1/3 of which aren't actually affected by the benefit cut at all. So on net, it balances out because you have 1/3 who you don't cut benefits for, but that doesn't seem to matter for the bottom third of the 2/3 that you did cut benefits for? I mean, that's kind of like, hey, we cut benefits, but we're looking at people who we didn't cut benefits, so it actually works out okay.
Well, don't we do that whenever we do a distributional analysis? When you look at, if you just said, I'm going to reduce the top, the Social Security's bend points that go 90, 32, and 15. If you just reduce the top 15 and you only look at people that hit the 15 bend point, you'd be missing all the population that was exempted from that.
Okay, but disabled people don't have a retirement age. Everyone has a benefit calculation.
Yeah, but so Social Security as a whole, disability and old age has a 2.2% actuarial imbalance. Okay, we need to find
hold
money.
on. It's averaged 2 since 1994, right? So it jumps around 2. This is a bad year because it's a recession.
Okay. Well, let me actually rewind for a minute and explain the difference between raising the normal retirement age and raising the early age. And I support both, but they have different consequences. Raising the normal retirement age has no consequences that are dependent on the year and the number of years you work. Because raising the normal retirement age, effectively, it changes the signal, but effectively it doesn't require you to change any of your habits. So you could still retire at the same exact age with a lower benefit, regardless of who you are. And so in theory, if you took out the disabled population, raising the normal retirement age should be distributionally neutral. Raising the early retirement age does affect how many years you're eligible for benefits, and therefore can affect lifetime benefits.
No, yeah, no, I'm not really seeing that. But that's just because we already have an incentive structure of when you claim benefits, right? Because retirement in the Social Security context just means when you claim benefits and not when you actually stop working. So we already penalize people for retiring early and reward people for retiring later, but we know from the distributional analysis that it's the poorer half that retires early and the later half that retires later.
No, we don't. People who retire early have about the same. People that retire at age 62, which is about 60% or 50% of the Social Security population, have basically the same demographics as people that retire later.
Okay, so what's amazing about that?
People that are lower income die earlier.
Okay, so
they
but
don't
what's
retire earlier.
Okay, so what's no, yeah.
They spend
retire
less
at
years.
death. Table 13. Remember that? Retire at death. Okay, but that's amazing because if half the people are taking early benefits at 62, then why are we saying that they should work longer? If we already know that half of people are taking early benefits, I mean, the idea that because we're living longer, we're working longer, but we already know half the people aren't taking the full retirement age.
Well, we're living longer, and we.
I'm just saying that I think the full retirement age increase, like, there are reasons to do it, but it's mainly just a way to cut benefits.
No, I just want to pull this back up. We are living longer. We are not working longer. We continue to retire. Basically, people retire at one of two ages. They retire sometime when they're 62, or they retire sometime when they're 65.
Right.
And that's what they do now. If you look at that blue line, that's a decline. It wasn't always that way.
Isn't it going up at the end?
Can I make? Yes. When we raised the normal retirement age from 65 to 67, well, from 65 to 66, that caused some people who are retiring 65 to retire 66. And some other things are happening also.
Right.
But effectively, we've continued to retire earlier as long as the retirement age has been 65 and then 62. And effectively, raised the normal retirement age caused some people to change their habits, although not nearly as many as if we had raised the early age. But the problem in general is we're continuing to live longer and we're not working longer. And that's why I'm proposing that we change at least the signals of the normal retirement age, if not the incentives with the early age.
But elderly people are working more. They're working more now than they ever have before. Right? If you look at the employment to population ratio of the over 65 population, right, of just people who are over 65 and working, it's at a higher share now than it's ever been since 1948.
Can I just interject a question really quickly on that point, which is, if we're finding that people are actually retiring, if it's true that the trend is not continue going up, which is what Kathryn, I think, is getting to, but if people were actually continuing to retire at the earlier ages, how much can this current job market, accommodate people working longer? So, in other words, how much is it voluntary that people are retiring at the younger ages?
I mean, I think that's a fair question. If you look at this graph, most of the decline happens. I mean, in fact, this graph doesn't even get into the current recession. So this graph is what happens in normal times. In normal times, when the economy is at full strength, not all economists, but most economists believe there's this thing called this lump of labor fallacy, which there's a limited number of jobs. Most economists don't believe that. Most economists believe that in a full economy, as more people work, it basically will create more jobs to accommodate them because there's more demand and more supply. In a bad economy like we have now, I think it would be a mistake to quickly raise the retirement age. I mean, the fiscal commission plan doesn't start until the mid-2020s and doesn't get a year until 2050.
Okay. One last question. Do we have? Yes.
This question's from Mark. This is Adam with NASI. You've presented a plan. We've spent the afternoon looking at during our interactive activity, several different plans and several different options. And then you mentioned that the current plan in Congress is the Do Nothing plan. And since we've now seen that it'll take 25 years to deplete the trust funds, how urgent is it to come up with Social Security reform right now as opposed to waiting 5 years, 10 years, or maybe closer to the time that the funds are depleted to ensure and enact reform?
Well, I mean, I wish I had this graph with me that showed how much the shortfall is for every year we wait. But essentially, if we did it now, we could gradually enact changes that were the equivalent of 2.2% of payroll. If we waited until let's say we waited until 2030, we'd have to gradually enact changes that were equal to about 4% of payroll. So that's not quite double, but that's almost double. What we want to do is, I think most people who support Social Security reform support the basic principle that you should protect or largely protect the currently retired, and you should phase in changes slowly. If we act now, we can schedule things for the future. We can phase in changes slowly, give people time to plan, and also our problem is smaller. If we act later, our problem is bigger. We don't have as many years. If you're someone that believes in the trust fund, we don't have as many years to collect interest on the money in the trust fund, and we give people less time to plan. So I think it'd be a big mistake.
Mark, do you know what the impact would be if it was 4 or 5 years with a change of administration, possibly?
That probably depends on which administration. No, I don't.
Any other questions for Mark or Kathryn? Okay. Oh, but do we have one more question? Okay. Well, I think that's basically it. So unless Mark or Kathryn, you have any final comments, do you want to leave the crowd with? Kathryn, do you want to do one last plug for your book?
Shameless. Hello, my name is Shameless, and I'm plugging something. No, next Wednesday, hold on, I'll think of the right way to say this. All right, so statistically, you don't care about retirement, and you don't care about Social Security, because I'm looking at young people in the room, and pretty much every poll ever says that you don't think you'll need it, you don't think you'll get it, and that you could probably spend your money better, so you don't really care that much about Social Security. You also don't know that much about it. That is what, statistically, I should believe about most of the people in this room. Obviously, Virginia, you are excluded in this, seeing as how you're a Social Security expert. So how do you tackle that? How do you convince a younger generation that Social Security is yours to lose? I mean, Mark said it himself. We're not going to cut people's, who are 55, 65, 55, 45. They're not going to see a benefit cut. It is going to be us. We will receive the majority of benefit cuts if benefit cuts are passed for Social Security. So how do you convince people who are so far removed from needing Social Security that Social Security is yours to lose? So I thought about it for about a year, and I think I'm done. And next Wednesday, we're going to release a young person's guide to Social Security to try and show you why it's not your parents' program, it's not your grandparents' program, it's your program. And you need to care about it, and it will be there for you.
Okay. So with that, please join me in thanking both Mark and Kathryn for a very candid conversation.